Hello, and welcome to The Forgotten King, an audio drama presented by Story Games. Let's tell a story.
She wasn't very nice, was she? Kyla recalled, meeting her aunt in the woods. What a strange question to ask after meeting a woman like Mariah of Green Lake Forest. For all her wisdom and counsel, albeit spoken to our minds rather than our ears, I thought she was rather lovely to be around, Zorion offered, as he picked up another old dusty tome from his library. It was a small but stunning space, a solid square room made of stones and tree branches, with a long, thin, rectangular window nearly twice the size of a man, open to the sky on the far wall opposite the door. Zorion's desk sat in front of the window, covered in scrolls and maps and candlesticks. What made the room cozy was the floor-to-ceiling bookcases that lined every wall, seemingly set into the rocks and the wood. Ever-burning candles made the covers glow on their shelves. Old books, and new ones too, mostly leather-bound, but some were covered in animal hide or hardened parchment. Others were just old pages held together by string. Kyla often felt a sense of longing when she was in this room. A sliver of sadness, maybe, knowing that no one in the world would ever read all those books. Some of them may never open again. They would inevitably sit there, collecting dust, hiding the secrets of Airion in their pages. Today, she was glad to see some of them open. Zorion was looking for something. A specific text he felt needed urgent revisiting. Kyla would often join Zorion in his library. It was quiet and still. Something about the space made her feel centered and safe. And at least the old blind man didn't incessantly talk about how strong he was, or how he wished to bed this woman or that lady or that girl, like Kyla's brothers would. Zorion spoke to her like she was an adult, like she mattered, like she was more than just a princess, third in line to the throne of House Arron. Now, having met her, I do wonder why Father kept my aunt a secret from us in the first place. Kyla tried to pry more information from the old man. He rarely gave up knowledge of such matters, but it was worth a try. There are many things a king is wise to keep from his children. Then my father must be one of the wisest men in Airion. He thinks we don't see it. Quintus and Protos don't see it, but I do. He's tired, Zorion. He's aging. He doesn't sleep well at night. And he has this far-off look in his eyes, like he knows something terrible that no one else does. He's keeping something from us, I'm sure. I have known your father since he was a boy in your grandfather Odin's arms. He only keeps information from you and your family that he knows would lead you to worry needlessly. And as you were made aware, he has a question that needs answering. That is what keeps him up at night. Something pecks at him, like a crow on a carcass, and that is much different than keeping a secret from those you love. The seer seemed to find the tome he was looking for, not with his eyes, obviously, but with his very being. A perfunctory "aha" slipped from his mouth as he descended the ladder with the book. "What are you looking for?" Kyla cooed from below, settling into a gathering of pillows and blankets. In and around the room there were wonderful vines of jasmine star, a rare vine that was said to grow only in the sunken marsh in the southeast region of Airion. How the beautiful flower vine made its way into Zorion's library to grow and spread its fingers, Kyla would never know. "It's the prophecy of Airion," Zorion declared into his library with a boom. It wasn't his intention to give the words such bravado. In this case, Kyla felt the words themselves had a depth and a power to them that shook the wood and stones surrounding her. Even the books looked shaken. It accounts for an event to come, that some think may have already happened, Zorion began to explain. Some of the words your aunt chose to utter to your father in her mind-speak reminded me of this ancient foretelling. He reached the floor where Kyla was seated. She had been petting the grey cat that spent its hours in the study. It curled its tail around Kyla's arm like a gentle baby snake as it purred. Zorion had never bothered to give it a name. She took to calling it Bailey. Which of her words caught your attention? Noble blood stirring beneath the dirt, the seer replied. Kyla shuddered when she heard the words again. Blue fire and white lightning, he added. He seemed content at letting that be all he shared with her. Kyla wasn't having it. You sound scared, Kyla tried. No, I don't, Zorion said flatly. Though it's clear now that you might be. Else why would the question have presented itself to you? You needn't be, young princess. At least, not right now. At least, I don't think. At least you sound sure about it. Sounding certain about something is a trick fools use to deceive the wise. Zorion let his words linger in the space between them as he lit a few candles, opened the tome, and poured oil into 2 small gold-plated bowls he positioned to his left and right. The bowl on his left he filled with pink oil. The right was cobalt blue. Are you ready? He set his 10 fingers in the liquid. Kyla had seen this before, and it was undoubtedly one of her favourite things to do in the wizard's library. Whenever Zorion wanted to read a book but didn't want to spend time on each word, he would use a seer spell to conjure the images of the written word into a swirling, dreamlike storm that revealed the story of the text as a vision above his head. He had let Kyla sit in on a few before, but not often. You know I'm ready, old man, Kyla said, laying back on her pillows. Bailey settled into Kyla's left side. It was as if Zorion lowered a shade, or perhaps dimmed the sun itself so the light in the room eventually faded away. In previous seer readings, Kyla had learned of a hunter from Dormith named Olok, who had dedicated his life to killing a hideous white bear menacing Treedown, a logging camp in the Silver Mist Forest. The bear had torn apart Olok's home and killed his wife. The widowed hunter became obsessed with exacting revenge on the beast. He had come close to killing it many times and took to calling the bear White Claw. The bear's home lingered in the space between the frozen trees, and Olok spent more time there than anywhere else in Eldaron, unendingly desperate to kill the thing that killed his love. Another story she watched was about a group of women who learned to breathe underwater, growing gills and fins on their bodies by drinking a concoction of seaweeds, lily juice, and fish oils. They decided to leave their husbands and spend a life among the creatures of the Blue Gulf in the south of Eldaron. They made a world of their own called Mirari, a world that mirrored the lives of those on land. In Southgate, kelp harvesters and sea travellers alike made eyes on the water maidens from time to time. Kyla had never been to the sea herself, but always admired the women for seeking a life of freedom under the waves. But from what she could tell, the story she was about to see, this prophecy, was going to be much different than those two, or the others Zorion had shown her. Noble blood, blue fire and lightning. The stained glass in her father's sword room came to mind. The thought itself was like a fractured piece of her druid aunt's conscience from stories she had heard from the elders. They had all heard the stories at some point, stories that made them ask how they were made, and who was there in Eldaron before them. She felt a mixture of excitement and dread swarm in her stomach as Zorion let out a deep breath and began the incantation that would project the words of the story into the air above them. Shi-alem, ma-lem alem, ha-hen mali, ha-sha. He whispered, and a black-grey cloud appeared in the space below the ceiling. It slowly formed itself together, a dense, magical fog. The air smelled of roses, then of horses, of wet iron and perfume. A flash of colour from the left side of the cloud, a small shadow on the right, a distant voice like a bird, and a churning mass at the centre of the image gave way to a picture, still at first, frozen in time, until all at once it was the size of the entire ceiling, and the prophecy of Airion played out before Kyla like a waking dream. An old man with a white beard and a grey robe stood outside the stone door of a fractured castle. But somehow, impossibly, the castle was gone. All of it. The wizard stood outside the door, screaming at it from above the sound of the waves crashing all around him. A violent violet storm spat at the ocean above the great stone door. It must have been the door to a fortress at some point. It was clearly locked. Maybe it had always been. The steps leading up to the door descended into the raging sea behind him. All around him, lightning clapped and thunder laughed at the first Seer's screaming. There was no way into that door, and there was only one way for him to go. All at once, it was as if a message had been shouted to the blind old man from the swirling sky, like words were riding on the lightning. He opened his closed eyes, and a piercing white light shot forth from their hollows and took over the vision. Now Kyla and Zorion were peeking into a deep hole, and there was a man down there in the blackness, a bearded man, so skinny and so pale, like bones and teeth chattering in skin. He looked bigger than he was, though, and strong. Endlessly strong. A world-shattering glow emanated from his centre, and the look on his face was of hope and light. Over the man's shoulder, red eyes crept closer out of the blackness, and then a red tongue, like a snake. It whispered something to the man. Arron! It spoke just more than a whisper. The lonely man turned to the voice, and the vision faded. And now there were riders in the desert, 12 men on horseback, leaving the city of Naros, clearly racing towards Airion, whips cracking, horses galloping, swords jumping from sheaths, screaming mouths, sand snakes and clogs, robed takers of tech pointing to the night sky and reading old texts from the sand spire. One of the texts showed a picture of a dragon and a man yelling at other disciples to look at the faded illustration. It was a red dragon, holding a key. Kyla felt herself sit up, inching her eyes closer to the strange images above. They made absolutely no sense to her at all. There were no dragons in Eldaron, and Airion had been at peace with Naros for 11 years. And who was that man in the cave? She could feel the questions bubbling up inside her mind when the smoke turned and twisted in on itself, and a new set of images began again. This time there was an old, blind woman standing outside an abandoned mansion, with grey clouds and dust all over the ground. A few candles lit the windows of the great estate. It could have had 100 rooms in it if someone took the time to count. The woman looked similar to Zorion. She was a seer. The second seer, if you looked closely. a red-robed wizard with lightning skittering across her fingertips. She looked lost, though, and afraid, like her spirit was trapped inside the mansion, or the mansion was trapped inside of her. A keyhole in the main gate of the haunted house began to glow suddenly and vibrantly, filling up the space, and Kyla realized through the bright light that she was looking at her mother. Her mother. Queen Breya was standing there, holding the key to the estate. A white, glowing key that burned with the life spark of Eldorón. The queen smiled contently, holding the key in her hand. Her red and blue steel pauldrons glistened with the heat of fire and flash of lightning. And as quickly as Queen Breya had come to be a part of the prophecy, now in the next instant she was Kyla, holding the key. But the key was growing in size and shape, its white metal stretching and extending to become a sword unrivaled by any in the Second Age. Kyla held the sword and thrust it in the air. White lightning ripped down from the heavens, with Shire's light breaking the clouds behind it. Kyla threw herself down on the floor, the image releasing a wave of euphoria and ecstasy unlike anything she had felt before. It was a deep burning in her bowels, in her gut, in her soul, in her lungs, in her blood, in her womb. It grabbed her and tickled her, kissed her and licked her, whispered into her ear all the sweet things she wanted to hear. She took a deep breath and exhaled as rain began to fall on Kyla's armour in the vision. It tinkled against the blade of the sword, and slowly it and her melted away into nothingness. And for a time, it just rained in the room. A long breath of rain, static drizzling like millions of drops of water falling to their death on repeat for endless seconds, a lifetime each time. Between the drops of water there formed a mist, a silver fog, like seeing the breath of Eldorón, wet and beautiful, sticky and sweet. Kyla could feel the cold mist this time. She let it cool her face and tickle the hairs inside her upturned nose. She even took a half-second to spy on Zorion. He was stoic as ever, his mind's eye sprinting effortlessly. The water began to crystallize and freeze, shards of ice coming together to bridge the gaps between each drop of water. And suddenly the image at the top of the ceiling was a borderless wall of ice. Cold, dense ice. And a black eel swam beneath the surface. It coiled in on itself, spasmed and twitched in the cold. Like ink in water, it flipped and ebbed and flowed into the ice, its black leeches getting thicker. The eel swam back into a frozen queen's mouth, her eyes blue and as vibrant as death. When she screamed, it broke the ice, and blackness between formed into men and women who had turned. Mindless, frozen zombies with black eyes running through the Frostfang Mountains, tearing down trees and eating the elk that live there. The turned all looked so sad, so willing to die. The last thing Kyla saw was the light in one of the elk's eyes as it was torn apart by black teeth and dirty fingernails. The elk had a red mane like a bushy beard and armour on its shoulders. It died when the prophecy ended. The cloud vanished and the room was still. The sun smiled its way back into the seer's labyrinth of books and myths. The space itself seemed to inhale with Kyla as she sat up, disturbing Bailey, who had fallen asleep beside her. I definitely have more questions than before we saw that. Kyla snorted up at her mentor. Indeed, Princess. Additional questions are often the only route to answers. In this case, though, I think there was something more like the truth to be gleaned from Airion's prediction of the second age of men. Zorion wiped the oil off his hands and turned to face the sun as it got closer to the horizon. It appears someone or something in Naros is trying to prevent the end of our time in the world. Another turning, it seems, is at hand. And your family, the Arrons, and I dare say even you, Kyla, will be at the centre of its outcome. We should tell my father. Kyla stood suddenly, driven to act. Zorion couldn't help his smile. Sometimes I forget you are still a child, and your imagination can leapfrog over your patience like children in a meadow. No, my dear Princess of Ironhall, for now we continue looking for clues, seeking out the truth with our mind, only acting on suspicion once facts have been procured. Kyla didn't like that answer. She tried to roll it into a different one with a new question. That seer in the beginning, it was Airion, wasn't it? It was. And he's your brother. He was. Kyla couldn't help but feel pulled to comfort Zorion. Instead, she resigned to words. Father told me once, you have a brother and a sister. Iris is your sister, and Airion was your brother. We are not brother and sister in the way you are with your siblings. Instead, we are cut from the same material. We are the same thing, in a way, but I have never met them, and likely never will. And what of the Red Dragon? What of it? What do you know about it? Presently, I know as much as you. That it was mentioned in the journal of a crazed old man, even more blind and even more senile than me. Kyla stood and made her way to the door. She could sense when Zorion was tiring of questions. He already appeared lost in thought, mostly indifferent to her presence. He just turned to the open window, letting Shire's light warm his face some more. I'd best be off to Malar Nightbringer. He makes me do push-ups till I fail if I'm late. She trickled across the wooden beams of the floor. The books waved her goodbye as she left, each title like little eyes. Kyla? Zorion queried before she was gone. You didn't ask any questions about your role in the prophecy. He removed his blindfold, letting the skin that covered the holes of his eye sockets peer at her. He never did that. It made her feel loved and terrified when he did, like her bones were vibrating and her heart was on fire. He was seeing her, in the truest sense of the word. Why not? He asked her pointedly. She took a moment to answer, letting his mind's eye fall on her soul. She stood confidently in his glare. My role in Eldaron will not be decided by a journal, or a vision, or an oracle in the woods, or by anyone other than me. Zorion was still as a statue. Prophecies are only as true as the people whom they are about allow them to be. I didn't ask you any questions because I already know that answers are yet to come. You don't have them, and neither did your brother. Kyla turned and slid down the stairwell. After a moment, Zorion said to Bailey, We'll have to keep an eye on her, I think. Bailey curled herself back into the pillows, soaking in Kyla's residual warmth. Maybe I'll keep that task to you, since you have the two, and I haven't got any to use. The old seer jeered as he turned back to the fading light on the horizon.
The Forgotten King was created and written by Michael Stagliano. Story by Michaela Oberhofer, El Silito, Matthew Pajad, Maisie Foth, Matthew O'Connell, and Stephen Stagliano. Voice narration by Kitty Liddon. Sound design and scoring by Chris Kirk. Produced by Greg Wood and Emil Hanton.